You know what's funny about New York? 8 million people crammed into this city, and somehow, in the middle of all that humanity, you can still find places where nobody goes, dark corners where the city forgets to look. I'm telling you this story at 2 a.m. because that's when it happened. That's when they always happened. And if you're watching this from New York right now, maybe check your locks, maybe close your curtains. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's still out there. Drop a comment. What borough are you in? Manhattan? Brooklyn? The Bronx? Doesn't matter. It found victims in all of them. My name is Detective Ray Castellano, NYPD, retired. Well, retired is the nice way of saying it. The truth is, after what happened in the winter of 2019, I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't look at the city the same way. Couldn't pretend that the things we tell ourselves about reality are true. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more cases like this. God knows I've got plenty. 23 years on the force in New York City. You see things. But this is the one that ended it all. December in New York has its own particular brand of misery. It's not just the cold that gets to you, though that wind coming off the Hudson will cut through whatever you're wearing like it's made of paper. It's the darkness that settles over the city by 4:30 in the afternoon. The way the Christmas decorations feel like mockery when you're standing over a crime scene. The way the snow turns to black slush within hours of falling, mixing with the grime and filth of 8 million people trying to survive another winter. I'd been a detective with the NYPD for 18 years by December 2019, working out of the 13th Precinct in Manhattan. 18 years of murders, robberies, assaults, all the various ways human beings find to destroy each other in a city that never sleeps. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. on December 3rd. I was actually asleep for once, managing to catch a few hours at home in my apartment in Queens instead of catching a nap on the break room couch at the precinct. My phone rang with that particular tone I'd programmed for work calls, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore even in the deepest sleep. "Castellano," I answered, my voice rough with sleep, already reaching for the pants I'd dropped on the floor 6 hours earlier. "Ray, it's Martinez." Captain Elena Martinez, my commanding officer for the last 5 years. Good cop, tough as nails, seen everything the city could throw at her. But there was something in her voice that night that immediately had me fully awake. "I need you at a scene. Now." "What have we got?" I asked, pulling on my shirt with one hand while I looked for my shoes with the other. "I honestly don't know how to describe it. Just get to 451 East 78th Street, apartment 19B. And Ray, prepare yourself. This is unlike anything we've seen before." The address was on the Upper East Side, one of those old pre-war buildings that had been converted into luxury apartments sometime in the 90s. The kind of place where the monthly rent could buy a house in most other parts of the country. As I drove through the nearly empty streets, the city looking deceptively peaceful under a fresh dusting of snow, I tried to imagine what could have rattled Martinez so badly. She'd worked the worst cases in the city. Serial killers, mob executions, crimes that would make a normal person lose their faith in humanity. Whatever was waiting for me in apartment 19B, it had to be bad. I was wrong. It wasn't bad. It was impossible. The building was already surrounded by squad cars when I arrived, their lights painting the snow in alternating red and blue. The doorman, an elderly Puerto Rican man named Carlos, who I'd later learn had worked there for 30 years, sat on the steps with a blanket around his shoulders, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare I'd seen on combat veterans. Whatever he'd seen up there, it had broken something in him. The elevator ride to the 19th floor felt like it took forever. Each floor we passed, I could feel the weight of what was waiting above pressing down on me. It was like the building itself was trying to warn me, trying to push me back down, back out onto the street where things made sense. But I'd been a cop too long to listen to feelings like that. Feelings didn't solve cases. Evidence did. Facts did. Logic did. The hallway on the 19th floor was packed with uniforms, all of them standing as far from apartment 19B as they could while still technically being on scene. Nobody was talking. Nobody was joking around the way cops usually do to deal with the horror of the job. They just stood there, silent, not looking at each other, not looking at the door to 19B, just staring at walls or floors or anywhere but where they were supposed to be looking. Martinez was standing outside the apartment door, and when she saw me, the relief on her face was palpable. She was Puerto Rican, early 40s, usually unflappable. Tonight she looked like she'd aged 10 years in the span of a few hours. "Thank God you're here," she said, her voice low. "I've got nobody who wants to go back in there, and I can't say I blame them." "What are we dealing with?" I asked, pulling on latex gloves from the box someone had left in the hallway. "The victim is Lauren Chen, 28 years old, worked as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs. Her boyfriend called it in when she didn't answer her phone for 2 days. The doorman let him in for a wellness check and—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "You need to see it for yourself. I can't explain it." I'd seen Martinez at the worst crime scenes the city had to offer. I'd seen her maintain professional composure while standing in pools of blood, while looking at things that would give civilians nightmares for the rest of their lives. The fact that she couldn't even describe what was in that apartment should have been my first warning to turn around and leave. But I was a detective. This was my job. So I opened the door and stepped inside. The apartment was beautiful in that Upper East Side way. High ceilings, crown molding, hardwood floors that probably cost more than my annual salary. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. Everything was perfectly clean, perfectly organized. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood splatter on the walls. It looked like Lauren Chen might walk out of the bedroom any moment, ready for another day at Goldman Sachs. Except for the body in the living room. I need you to understand something. I've seen bodies in every state of decomposition, every type of violent death the human mind can conceive. I've seen what happens when people are shot, stabbed, burned, drowned, pushed from buildings, hit by trains. The human body, when it stops being human and becomes just a body, can be distorted in countless horrible ways. But it always makes sense. There's always cause and effect. Physics still applies. Biology still applies. What I saw in Lauren Chen's living room didn't make sense. It violated everything I understood about how reality works. Lauren Chen was standing in the center of her living room, not lying down, not propped up, standing. But she was clearly dead, and had been for at least 2 days based on the early signs of decomposition. Her feet were flat on the floor, her arms at her sides, her head tilted slightly back as if she was looking at something on the ceiling. Her eyes were open, clouded with death, but somehow still seeming to track movement. And she was hollow. I don't mean thin or emaciated. I mean hollow. Her skin was intact, completely unbroken, but it hung on her frame like an ill-fitting suit. When I walked around her, because you had to walk around her, she was standing directly in the center of the room. I could see that her back was the same. The skin was there, but whatever should have been inside it, muscles, organs, bones, all of it was gone. She was like a perfect Lauren Chen suit that someone had left standing in the middle of the room. "How?" was all I could manage to say. Martinez had followed me in, though she stayed near the door. "That's what we've been asking. The ME is on his way, but I wanted you to see it first, to see it in situ." I pulled out my flashlight and looked closer, careful not to touch anything. There were no wounds, no incisions, no puncture marks. The skin was completely intact except for... I leaned closer, my flashlight beam focused on her neck. There were 2 small marks there, almost invisible, each no bigger than a pinprick. They looked like injection marks, but that didn't explain any of this. "Has anyone touched the body?" I asked. "The boyfriend, when he found her, says he tried to shake her, to wake her up. That's when he realized she was empty. Started screaming, ran out of the apartment. Carlos, the doorman, came up, took one look, and called 911. I walked slowly around the body again, trying to understand what I was seeing. The apartment's heat was on, and there was a slight movement of air from the vents. As I watched, Lauren Chen's skin rippled slightly in the breeze, like a sail with no wind. The sight made my stomach turn in a way that 18 years of crime scenes hadn't prepared me for. "There's more," Martinez said quietly. "Look at the windows." I looked where she was pointing. On the inside of every window in the apartment, drawn in what looked like condensation but didn't wipe away, were symbols. They weren't any language I recognized. Not Chinese, despite the victim's heritage, not Arabic, not Hebrew, nothing I'd seen in 18 years of working in the most diverse city in the world. They were complex, geometric, and looking at them too long made my eyes water and my head start to pound. "The boyfriend says those weren't there when he last visited 3 days ago," Martinez continued. "And here's the really weird part. They're on the inside of the glass, but they're cold to the touch, like they're made of ice, but they don't melt." I approached one of the windows, reaching out carefully to touch one of the symbols. Martinez was right. It was cold, so cold it burned my finger even through the latex glove. But it didn't melt, didn't smear, didn't behave like ice should behave. It was like someone had carved the symbols out of solid cold and somehow adhered them to the glass. "Have we canvassed the building?" I asked, trying to fall back on procedure when faced with the impossible. "Every apartment on this floor, and the ones above and below. Nobody heard anything, saw anything. The security footage shows Lauren coming home from work 3 days ago at 7:23 p.m. She never left. Nobody else entered or left her apartment until the boyfriend showed up tonight." "That's impossible," I said. "Someone had to do this. Someone had to get in." "The doorman swears nobody got past him. The service entrance is alarmed and the alarm never went off. The security footage covers every possible entrance. Ray, according to everything we can verify, Lauren Chen came home 3 days ago and then this just, happened to her. No perpetrator, no break-in, no explanation." I stood there in that beautiful apartment, looking at the impossible corpse of Lauren Chen, at the impossible symbols on the windows, and felt something I hadn't felt since my first day on the job. Complete and total confusion. Crime scenes, even the worst ones, tell stories. There's evidence, there's logic. There's a sequence of events that led from point A to point B. This scene was telling me a story too, but it was a story that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist in the world I thought I knew. "Get the crime scene unit up here," I said finally. "Tell them to photograph everything, and I mean everything. Every angle of the body, every symbol on every window, every inch of this apartment. And nobody talks to the press about this, understand? Not until we know what we're dealing with." Martinez nodded and started making calls. I continued to examine the scene, looking for something, anything that would make this make sense. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The apartment was pristine except for the body and the symbols. Lauren's purse was on the kitchen counter, her keys beside it. Her laptop was open on the dining room table, showing a spreadsheet she'd apparently been working on before. Whatever happened to her? I looked at the timestamp on the last saved version of the spreadsheet. December 1st, 8:47 p.m. Whatever had happened to Lauren Chen had happened sometime after that. Sometime after she'd been sitting at her dining room table, working on quarterly projections for Goldman Sachs, living her normal life in her beautiful apartment. And then something had come for her, something that could apparently remove everything inside a human body without breaking the skin, something that could draw symbols in frozen condensation that didn't melt, something that could do all of this without being seen, without leaving evidence, without making sense. The medical examiner arrived about an hour later, Dr. Keith Patel, a man I'd worked with on dozens of cases. He was usually unflappable, approaching even the most gruesome corpses with clinical detachment. But when he saw Lauren Chen, he actually took a step back. "What in the name of—" he started, then stopped, walking slowly around the body just as I had. "This is impossible." "That seems to be the consensus," I said. "Can you tell me anything?" He pulled on gloves and began a preliminary examination, being extraordinarily careful not to disturb the position of the body. "Rigor mortis has set in and begun to pass, so death was probably 48 to 72 hours ago. But Ray, this doesn't make sense. The body is standing. Even with rigor, a body can't maintain this position, and the skin—" He gently pressed on Lauren's arm, and the skin dimpled like pressing on a balloon. "There's nothing inside, no resistance, no bones, no muscle, no organs. But the skin is intact, completely intact. How is that possible?" "I was hoping you could tell me," I said. "I'll need to get her back to the morgue, do a full examination. But Ray, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. Never even heard of anything like this." As the crime scene techs worked and Dr. Patel prepared to transport the body, I stood at those windows, looking out at the city and looking at those impossible symbols. They seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. Whatever happened to her, she was conscious for it. She experienced a level of terror that should have killed her from the neurological overload alone. But something kept her alive, kept her conscious, right until the end. I left the medical examiner's office feeling sick in a way that had nothing to do with the smells of death and formaldehyde. Lauren Chen had been tortured, but not in any way that fit into our understanding of torture. She'd been emptied, hollowed out, turned into something that violated the laws of physics and biology, and she'd been awake for all of it. Back at the precinct, I threw myself into the investigation with a desperation I hadn't felt since my early days on the force. I interviewed everyone in Lauren's life, co-workers, friends, family, ex-boyfriends, anyone who might have had any connection to her. But Lauren Chen had been exactly what she appeared to be. A hard-working young professional with no enemies, no dark secrets, no connections to anything that would explain what had happened to her. I was expanding the search, looking into similar cases in other jurisdictions, when the second body was found. December 9th, 6:43 a.m. Marcus Thompson, 34, a software engineer at a startup in Brooklyn. His roommate found him in their Williamsburg loft, and the first responders were so disturbed by what they saw that 3 of them immediately requested psychological counseling. I arrived at the scene within an hour of the call. The loft was one of those converted warehouse spaces that had been turned into overpriced apartments during Brooklyn's gentrification, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that cost extra for their authenticity. Marcus Thompson was in the living area, and he was worse than Lauren Chen. He was standing, just like Lauren had been, but his body had been twisted into a shape that human anatomy shouldn't allow. His spine was bent backward at a 90-degree angle, his head touching his heels, his arms wrapped around his torso multiple times like they'd been turned to rubber. His skin was intact, completely unbroken, but it was clear that every bone in his body had been shattered, turned to powder, allowing him to be molded like clay into this impossible configuration. And he was hollow, just like Lauren. Everything inside gone, leaving only the skin contorted into a grotesque sculpture. The symbols were there too, covering every window, but this time they were different, more complex, more numerous. And they weren't just on the windows, they were on the mirrors, on the TV screen, on every reflective surface in the apartment. Looking at them made my vision blur, made my nose start to bleed. One of the crime scene techs actually passed out and had to be taken to the hospital. But the worst part was the expression on Marcus Thompson's face. Despite the impossible angle of his neck, despite the fact that he'd been dead for at least 2 days, his face was twisted into an expression of pure, transcendent terror. It was the face of someone who had seen something that the human mind wasn't meant to comprehend, something that had broken him before it had killed him. "This can't be the same perpetrator," Martinez said, standing as far from the body as she could while still being in the room. "The MO is completely different." "No," I said, recognizing something in the positioning, in the deliberateness of it all. "It's the same. It's escalating, learning, getting better at what it does." "Better? Ray, this is insane. How does someone do this? How does someone remove every bone, every organ, every drop of blood from a human body without breaking the skin?" I didn't have an answer for her, but I was starting to develop a terrible suspicion that we weren't dealing with a someone at all. The pattern became clear when the third body was discovered 2 days later. David Kim, 41, an investment banker living in a penthouse in Tribeca. He'd been posed differently than the others. His hollow skin stretched out like a starfish, arms and legs extended to their absolute limit, pinned to the walls with nothing but the tension of the stretched skin holding him in place. The symbols had evolved again, covering not just reflective surfaces but carved into the walls themselves, burned into the furniture, somehow embedded in the air so that you could see them floating like holograms in the middle of the room. 3 victims, 3 apartments. I spread out a map of New York City on my desk and marked the locations. Upper East Side, Williamsburg, Tribeca. They formed a triangle, nearly perfect in its geometry, with Central Park at its center. I stared at that map for hours, trying to understand what it meant, what the pattern was telling us. That's when I noticed the dates. December 3rd, December 9th, December 11th. The intervals were decreasing. Whatever was doing this was speeding up, getting hungrier, more confident. I plotted the trajectory, did the math, and felt my blood run cold. If the pattern held, the next victim would be tomorrow. December 12th. I took my findings to Martinez, who took them to the chief, who took them to the commissioner. Within hours, we had a task force assembled. 20 detectives, 50 uniformed officers, FBI consultants, even some professors from Columbia who specialized in criminal psychology and pattern analysis. But none of them had any more idea what we were dealing with than I did. We tried to predict where the next attack would happen based on the geographical pattern, but the triangle gave us no clues about where the 4th point would be. We increased patrols in all the wealthy residential areas, figuring the killer was targeting affluent victims. We had units stationed at every luxury building we could cover, but New York City has a lot of luxury buildings. We were searching for a needle in a haystack, except we didn't even know what the needle looked like. December 12th came and went with no new victims, and for a moment, we thought maybe we'd scared the killer off. Maybe the increased police presence had disrupted their plans. But then December 13th arrived, and with it came a phone call that changed everything. It was 3:17 a.m. when my phone rang. I was actually at the precinct, having basically moved into my office at this point, sleeping on the couch when exhaustion finally overtook me. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Detective Castellano?" The voice was wrong. It sounded like multiple people speaking in unison, their words slightly out of sync, creating an echo effect that made my skin crawl. "You've been looking for me." I sat bolt upright, fumbling for the record button on my phone. "Who is this?" "I have many names. I am older than your city, older than your civilization. I have slept beneath these streets for centuries, but now I wake. Now I feed." "You killed those people. Lauren Chen, Marcus Thompson, David Kim. Killed? The thing laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in reverse. No, Detective. I transformed them. I elevated them. They are part of something greater now, something your limited mind cannot comprehend. Where are you? I demanded, already signaling to the officer on duty to start tracing the call. I am everywhere and nowhere. I am in the spaces between spaces, the moments between moments. But if you wish to find me, to truly understand what you're dealing with, come to where it began. Come to the center. Come alone, or more will be transformed. You have 1 hour. The line went dead. The trace came back pointing to a location that made my blood run cold. Central Park. The exact geometric center of the triangle formed by the 3 murder sites. I should have called for backup. I should have brought the entire task force. But something in that voice, some horrible certainty, told me it wasn't bluffing. If I didn't come alone, more people would die. And despite every instinct screaming at me not to go, despite knowing I was probably walking to my death, I went. Central Park, at 4 a.m. in December, is a different world from the tourist destination people know. It's dark in ways that city darkness usually isn't, with paths that seem to lead nowhere and shadows that move when you're not looking directly at them. I made my way to the geometric center of the triangle, a spot near the reservoir that was far from any path, where the trees grew thick and the city sounds became muffled and distant. I stood there in the darkness, my service weapon drawn, but knowing it would be useless against whatever I was about to face. The cold was bitter, but the sweat running down my back had nothing to do with exertion. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, to get away from this place, but I stood my ground. You came. The voice was behind me, above me, all around me. I spun, trying to locate its source, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and trees and the distant lights of the city. You are brave for one of your kind. Foolish, but brave. Show yourself, I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. As you wish. The air in front of me began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but in the freezing December night. The shimmer coalesced, solidified, and I found myself face to face with something that my mind struggled to process. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, but it was wrong in every possible way. Too tall, with limbs that bent in too many places. Its skin wasn't skin, but something that looked like living shadow, constantly shifting and writhing. Where its face should have been was a void filled with those same symbols I'd seen at the crime scenes, floating and rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt to perceive. But the worst part was what surrounded it. Floating in the air like grotesque balloons were the skins of Lauren Chen, Marcus Thompson, and David Kim, perfectly preserved, their faces still frozen in those expressions of ultimate terror. They orbited the creature like planets around a sun, and I could see something moving inside them, something that glowed with a sick, pale light. "What are you?" I whispered, my gun shaking in my hand. "I am what your kind calls impossible," it said, its voice coming from everywhere except the thing in front of me. "I am from the spaces your mathematics cannot describe, the dimensions your physics cannot measure. I have existed since before your ancestors crawled from the primordial soup, and I will exist long after your species has turned to dust. Why are you killing people? Not killing, transforming. Your kind fascinated me when I first encountered you thousands of years ago. So much potential locked inside such fragile shells. I learned to free that potential, to liberate the essence while preserving the form. It is art, Detective Castellano, the purest form of art." "It's murder," I said, trying to keep it talking while I figured out what to do.
Those were innocent people. Innocent. Guilty. These are constructs of your limited morality. To me, they were simply materials, canvas and paint for my masterpiece. The thing moved closer, and the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. And you, detective, will be my greatest work yet. You've been touched by my presence, marked by your investigation. You've looked upon my symbols and survived. You are ready for transformation. It reached out with one of those impossible limbs, and I did the only thing I could think of. I shot it. 6 rounds, center mass, or what I thought was center mass on a creature that didn't seem to have a fixed form. The bullets passed through it like it was made of smoke, striking trees behind it with dull thuds. The creature laughed again, that horrible sound of breaking and unbreaking glass. Your weapons are useless, detective. Your physics cannot touch me. Your reality is just a small subset of what truly exists, and I exist outside your subset. But then something unexpected happened. My phone rang. The normal, mundane sound of my work phone ringing cut through the supernatural horror of the moment like a knife. The creature actually recoiled, its form wavering, the floating skins dropping a few feet before rising again. Without thinking, I answered the phone. It was Martinez. "Ray, where the hell are you? We've got another body. Columbus Circle. It's different this time." "I'll be right there," I said, never taking my eyes off the creature. "You cannot leave," it said, but there was something different in its voice now. Uncertainty, maybe. "We are not finished." "Yes, we are," I said, backing away slowly. "Because I know something now. You can affect our world, but our world affects you, too. You're not as untouchable as you think." The creature made no move to stop me as I backed away, but its voice followed me through the trees. "This is not over, Detective Castellano. You cannot stop what has begun. The transformation of your species is inevitable, and you will be the one to witness it all." I ran then, ran through the dark paths of Central Park, ran toward the lights and sounds of the city, ran toward Columbus Circle and whatever fresh horror awaited me there. But even as I ran, I could feel something had changed. The creature had marked me somehow, connected us in a way I didn't understand. I could feel its presence in the back of my mind, a constant whisper that I couldn't quite hear, but couldn't shut out either. Columbus Circle at 5 a.m. was a chaos of flashing lights and yellow tape, but it wasn't the usual controlled chaos of a crime scene. The uniformed officers were keeping much further back than normal, and several of them looked like they'd been sick. An ambulance was pulling away as I arrived, and through the back window I could see one of our crime scene techs being given oxygen, her face pale and her hands shaking uncontrollably. Martinez met me at the perimeter, and she looked worse than I'd ever seen her. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usually perfect composure was cracking at the edges. "Ray, where the fuck were you? And why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" I wanted to tell her everything, about the creature in Central Park, about the floating skins, about the connection I could now feel in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. But looking at her exhausted face, at the barely controlled panic in the officers around us, I knew she couldn't handle that truth. Not yet. "Following a lead," I said simply. "What do we have?" "We have a fucking nightmare, is what we have." She led me toward the scene, but stopped about 20 feet away. "The victim is Jennifer Walsh, 31, corporate lawyer. But Ray, it's not like the others. It's worse." The body, if you could still call it that, was in the small plaza near the subway entrance. Jennifer Walsh hadn't just been hollowed out and posed. She had been turned inside out. Her skin was on the inside now, somehow folded through itself in a way that violated three-dimensional geometry.
creating a shape that hurt to look at. It was like one of those impossible objects artists draw, the ones that can exist on paper but not in reality. Except this was real. This was flesh and bone twisted through dimensions that shouldn't exist. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she was still alive. I could see her eyes moving inside the twisted mass of her inverted form, tracking us as we approached. Her mouth, now somewhere near what should have been her stomach, was moving, trying to form words. The paramedics hadn't been able to figure out how to even approach her, let alone transport her. She should have been dead instantly from shock, from blood loss, from the simple impossibility of what had been done to her. But something was keeping her alive, keeping her conscious, trapped in a body that had been transformed into a living topology problem. My God, I breathed, my legs suddenly weak. The connection in my mind pulsed, and I could feel the creature's satisfaction, its pride in this new creation. The symbols are different too, Martinez said, pointing to the ground around the body. They weren't just drawn or carved this time. They were raised, three-dimensional, growing out of the concrete itself like some kind of crystalline formation. They spiraled up from the ground, creating a cage of impossible geometry around Jennifer Walsh's transformed body. And they were spreading, slowly but visibly, the concrete transforming at a molecular level. "We need to evacuate the area," I said, backing away. "Now, everyone back, at least 100 feet. Ray, what do you know that you're not telling me?" Martinez grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "What the hell is happening to our city?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number. I knew who it would be before I answered. "Do you see now, Detective?" The creature's multi-voiced whisper came through the speaker. "Do you understand what I am capable of? This is only the beginning. Your kind's transformation is inevitable." "Turn her back," I demanded, walking away from Martinez so she couldn't hear. "Whatever you've done to her, undo it. She is art now, living art. She will exist in this state for days, perhaps weeks, experiencing reality from a perspective your limited mind cannot imagine. She is elevated beyond your crude three-dimensional existence. She's suffering. She is transcending, but if you wish to end her transcendence, you know where to find me. Come alone, Detective. Come ready to bargain." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Jennifer Walsh was still alive, still suffering in ways that the human mind wasn't equipped to understand. Every instinct told me not to go back to that thing in Central Park, but what choice did I have? "Ray." Martinez was beside me again. "We need to do something. The symbols, they're spreading faster. They'll reach the subway entrance in minutes." She was right. The crystalline formations were growing, transforming more and more of the plaza into those reality-bending symbols. If they reached the subway, if they spread underground. Manhattan had millions of people packed onto an island. If this thing, whatever it was, could transform concrete and steel as easily as it transformed human flesh, the entire city was in danger. "Get everyone back," I told her. "Set up a perimeter 3 blocks in every direction. Nobody goes near those symbols." "What are you going to do?" "What I have to." I left before she could stop me, heading back to Central Park. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky a sick orange through the Manhattan smog, but the park still felt dark, still felt wrong. I could feel the creature's presence growing stronger as I approached the reservoir, that connection in my mind guiding me like a horrible GPS. It was waiting for me in the same spot, but this time it had made no effort to hide its true nature. Reality seemed to bend around it, the trees twisting into impossible angles, the ground rippling like water. The skins of its previous victims still floated around it, but now there were more. Dozens of them, all from different eras judging by their clothing. This thing had been killing for a long time, much longer than just this week.
You return, it said, and I could hear pleasure in its impossible voice. You begin to understand your role in this. My role? You are the herald, detective, the one who will document the transformation of your species. Through our connection, you will witness and record as I elevate humanity beyond its current limitations. You're insane. Sanity is a concept that applies only within the narrow confines of your reality. I exist beyond those confines. It moved closer, and I could feel the temperature drop, could see frost forming on the grass around us. But I am willing to bargain. The female you wish saved, I will restore her to her original configuration. In exchange, you will cease your investigation. You will tell your superiors that the killer has moved on, left the city. You will allow me to continue my work unimpeded. I can't do that. You'll keep killing. I will keep transforming. It is my nature, my purpose. Your kind fascinated me when I first encountered you. So much potential locked inside such limiting flesh. I am freeing that potential. You're torturing and murdering innocent people. The creature was silent for a moment, those symbols that served as its face rearranging themselves in what might have been contemplation. A compromise, then. I will limit myself to 1 transformation per month. I will choose only those who wish for change, those who call out in their despair for something, anything, to alter their existence, and I will restore the female. 1 person per month, 12 people a year. It was horrible, unthinkable. But Jennifer Walsh was suffering right now, and those symbols were spreading through Columbus Circle. How many would die if this thing decided to stop playing games and transform a whole building, a whole block? How do I know you'll keep your word? Because, Detective Castellano, I am bound by rules older than your universe. When I make a bargain, I cannot break it. It is the nature of what I am. I thought about Jennifer Walsh's eyes, still conscious, still aware inside her impossibly transformed body. I thought about the symbols spreading through Columbus Circle, reaching toward the subway tunnels that connected to every part of the city. I thought about the 20 million people in the greater New York area, all of them potential victims if this thing decided to stop being selective. Restore her first, I said. Prove you can undo what you've done. The creature extended one of those impossible limbs, and I felt something shift in reality. It was like the world hiccuped, missed a beat, and then resumed. My phone immediately rang. "Ray!" Martinez's voice was shocked. "You're not going to believe this. The Walsh woman, she's normal again. She's unconscious, but she's normal. The symbols are gone too. Just gone, like they were never there. What the hell is happening?" "I'll explain later," I lied, ending the call. "It is done," the creature said. "She will remember nothing, a mercy I grant her. Now, do we have a bargain?" I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness of Central Park, facing a creature that shouldn't exist, preparing to make a deal that would haunt me for the rest of my life. But what choice did I have? Let it continue escalating until it decided to transform Times Square on New Year's Eve. Wait until it got bored with individual victims and decided to see what happened when it transformed an entire apartment building? 1 per month, I said, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. And only those who are already suffering, already wishing for death. Agreed. The creature's form shimmered, and suddenly I felt something burn into my mind, the bargain sealing itself into my consciousness like a brand. You will know when I feed. You will feel it through our connection. But you will not interfere. The investigation will find nothing. I exist outside your reality, detective. Your forensics cannot detect what your science cannot explain. Tell them whatever story you wish. Tell them the killer has left the city. Tell them it was a copycat who has been stopped.
Tell them anything. They will believe you because the alternative is to accept that their understanding of reality is fundamentally wrong. The creature began to fade, its form becoming translucent. We are bound now, Detective Castellano, you and I, herald and artist. You will document my work, whether you wish to or not. And perhaps in time you will come to appreciate the beauty of transformation. It vanished, leaving me alone in Central Park as the sun rose over Manhattan. But I could still feel it, that connection in my mind, that awareness of something vast and alien existing just outside the borders of normal reality. I knew it was still here, still in the city, waiting for the next month, the next victim, the next transformation. I walked back to Columbus Circle, where Jennifer Walsh was being loaded into an ambulance, unconscious but whole. The crime scene techs were photographing the area where the symbols had been, but there was nothing to photograph. The concrete was unmarked, untouched, as if the crystalline growths had never existed. "Ray," Martinez approached me, her expression a mix of relief and suspicion. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said, which was technically true. Sometimes these cases just resolve themselves. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide whether to push for the truth. But then she looked at the ambulance driving away with Jennifer Walsh alive inside it, looked at the normal concrete where reality-bending symbols had been growing just an hour ago, and decided that maybe some truths were better left unknown. "The brass wants this wrapped up quickly," she said finally. "They're spooked. The whole city's spooked. Can you make this go away, Ray?" "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of my bargain settling on my shoulders like lead. "I can make it go away." Over the next few days, I crafted a story that was just plausible enough to be believed. A serial killer with a medical background and access to experimental drugs. The bodies had been posed using a combination of muscle relaxants and fast-acting, rigor mortis-inducing compounds. The hollowing was an optical illusion created by the specific positioning and lighting. The symbols were a form of mass hysteria, people seeing patterns that weren't really there. Jennifer Walsh had suffered a psychotic break and injured herself, her memories confused by trauma. It was all bullshit, every word of it. But it was bullshit that fit into the comfortable framework of reality that people needed to believe in. The FBI bought it. The mayor's office bought it. The press bought it. They wanted to buy it, needed to buy it, because the alternative was accepting that something impossible had happened in the middle of New York City. The task force was disbanded. The case was closed. Life in the city went back to normal, or as normal as life in New York ever gets. But I knew the truth. I knew that somewhere in the city, probably in those spaces, between spaces it had talked about, the creature was waiting for the month to pass, waiting for someone to call out in despair, waiting to transform again, and I would know when it happened. The connection between us meant I would feel it when it fed, would see through its eyes as it turned another human being into living art. I would be the unwilling witness to every transformation, the chronicler of horrors that the rest of the world would never know about. January 12th, 2020, exactly 1 month after Jennifer Walsh. I was at home, trying to watch television, trying to pretend my life was normal, when I felt it. The connection flared to life, and suddenly I was there with it, watching through eyes that weren't eyes as it approached its victim. She was a homeless woman living in the subway tunnels beneath Penn Station. Sarah Martinez, though she hadn't used that name in years. Schizophrenia had taken her career, her family, her life. She sat in her makeshift shelter, surrounded by the detritus of a life that had fallen apart, crying and praying for an end to the voices in her head, for an escape from the hell her existence had become. The creature came to her not as a horror, but as a mercy. When it spoke to her, she didn't scream. She looked at it with eyes that had seen too much already. that had no fear left to give. "Please," was all she said. The transformation was different this time. Gentle, almost. It didn't hollow her out or twist her into impossible shapes. Instead, it transformed her into something beautiful in its alien way, a crystalline structure that captured and reflected light in patterns that told the story of her life, every moment of joy and sorrow frozen in living glass. When it was done, she was no longer human, but she was no longer suffering either. She had become art, just as the creature had promised, but art that held a kind of peace. The body would be found the next morning, and I would be called to the scene. I would tell them it was a different killer, unrelated to the December murders. I would help them construct another comfortable lie, and then I would go home and try to wash the feeling of the creature's satisfaction out of my mind. This became my life. Once a month I would feel the creature feed. Once a month I would help cover up the impossible truth. And each time, a little piece of my sanity would crumble away. The connection grew stronger over time, and sometimes I would catch glimpses of its thoughts, alien and vast and utterly indifferent to human concepts of morality. By June 2020, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the secret, the monthly horrors I was forced to witness, the constant presence of the creature in the back of my mind, it was destroying me. I tried to quit the force, but Martinez talked me out of it. I tried therapy, but how do you tell a therapist that you're psychically connected to an interdimensional entity that turns people into living art? I started drinking heavily, trying to numb the connection, but that only made it worse. When I was drunk, the barriers between my mind and the creatures became thinner. I would have visions of the spaces between spaces, the dimensions beyond dimensions where things like it existed. I would see the true scope of reality, how small and insignificant our three-dimensional world really was, and the knowledge was slowly driving me insane. By November 2020, I was a shell of my former self. 20 pounds lighter, hands that shook until I'd had my morning drink, eyes that couldn't meet anyone's gaze because I was afraid they'd see the truth hiding behind them. The pandemic had made everything worse. The isolation, the fear that permeated the city, the constant presence of death. The creature fed on despair, and New York in 2020 had plenty of that to offer. The November feeding was different. I felt it coming days in advance, the creature's anticipation bleeding through our connection like oil through water. It had been patient for 11 months, taking only one victim per month as agreed, choosing those who truly wished for release. But something was changing. I could feel its hunger growing, its patience wearing thin. The victim was supposed to be a terminal cancer patient in a hospice in Queens, someone who had been begging for death for weeks. But when the connection flared to life on November 12th, I knew immediately that something had gone wrong. The creature wasn't in Queens. It was in Manhattan, in a luxury high-rise on the Upper West Side. And it wasn't alone. Through our connection, I saw what it saw. A penthouse apartment full of people, a party despite the pandemic restrictions, young Wall Street types, the kind who thought money made them immortal, celebrating some merger or IPO or whatever it was that parasites celebrated. 23 people, drunk and high and completely unaware that death had just walked in among them. "No," I said out loud, sitting bolt upright in my apartment. "We had a deal. 1 per month. Only those who want it." The creature's voice echoed in my mind, no longer needing a phone to communicate with me. "I grow tired of our bargain, Detective. These mortals poison your world with their greed, their selfishness. They are a cancer in the body of your species. Removing them is a mercy to the rest. You can't do this. You promised." "I promised 1 per month. I said nothing about taking them one at a time."
I was already grabbing my keys, my gun, racing for the door. I knew the building. The Avalon, one of those obscenely expensive places where apartments cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Through the connection, I could feel the creature beginning its work, reality starting to bend and twist in that penthouse. The drive from Queens to the Upper West Side usually took 40 minutes. I made it in 15, running red lights, swerving through traffic, my badge out the window to wave off any cops who might try to stop me. But even as I drove, I could feel it happening, could see through the creature's perception as it began to transform those 23 people. It wasn't killing them one by one. It was transforming them simultaneously, weaving them together into something that could not exist. Their bodies were becoming liquid, flowing together like mercury, but still maintaining their consciousness, their individuality, even as they merged into something greater and more terrible. They were becoming a single organism made of 23 minds, 23 souls trapped in a unified body that existed in more dimensions than human senses could perceive. I burst into the Avalon's lobby, badge out, screaming at the doorman to call 911 to evacuate the building. But I knew it was already too late. I could feel the transformation nearing completion 40 floors above me. The elevator ride was agony, each floor an eternity, the connection showing me every detail of what was happening in that penthouse. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, I stepped into madness. The hallway was wrong. The geometry didn't make sense. The walls meeting at angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The symbols were everywhere, not carved or drawn, but existing as part of the fundamental structure of reality in this place. And from the penthouse at the end of the hall came a sound that wasn't quite screaming, wasn't quite singing, but something in between that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. I kicked open the door to the penthouse and immediately wished I hadn't. The 23 party guests had been transformed into something that my mind couldn't fully process. It was like looking at a living fractal, a being that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, parts of it phasing in and out of visible reality. 23 faces emerged and submerged from its surface like swimmers in an ocean of flesh, their expressions locked in a mixture of terror and something worse, understanding. They could perceive reality the way the creature did now, could see the true nature of existence, and the knowledge was destroying their minds even as their bodies had been destroyed and remade. The creature stood in the center of the room, no longer making any attempt to hide its true nature. In this space, where reality had been weakened by its presence, I could see it clearly for the first time. It wasn't just alien. It was wrong on a fundamental level, like looking at something that existed in violation of the basic laws that governed existence. It had too many angles, too many surfaces, as if someone had tried to force a higher dimensional object into our three-dimensional world and failed catastrophically. "You see now," it said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "This is what your species could become. Not individual sparks of consciousness trapped in isolated flesh, but unified, elevated, transformed into something that can perceive true reality." "You're killing them!" I screamed, raising my gun even though I knew it was useless. "I am evolving them. In 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, this is what humanity will become naturally. I am simply accelerating the process. Turn them back, please. We had a deal. Our deal is void." The creature moved toward me and reality rippled around it like water. "You have served your purpose, detective. You have been my herald, my witness. But now it is time for the real work to begin. This city, with its millions of souls crying out in pain and despair, will be my canvas. I will transform them all, unite them all, elevate them all." I shot it, emptied my entire clip into the thing, knowing it would do nothing but needing to try anyway. The bullets passed through it harmlessly, but something else happened. The connection between us, the psychic link that had been my curse for 11 months, conducted my desperate defiance back to the creature. And for just a moment, I felt it flinch. It wasn't the bullets that hurt it. It was the emotion behind them, the pure, human determination to protect others, to stand against the impossible, to refuse to accept the inevitable. These were concepts alien to the creature, antibodies to its alien consciousness. "You feed on despair," I said, understanding flooding through me. "But you can't handle hope. You can't handle defiance. That's why you need people to agree to transformation, why you make bargains. You're not as powerful as you pretend to be." The creature recoiled, its form wavering. "You understand nothing, insect." But I did understand. The connection worked both ways, and in that moment of vulnerability, I saw into its mind the way it had been seeing into mine. I saw its true nature, its limitations, its fears. It wasn't some omnipotent God. It was a parasite, feeding on human suffering because it needed that energy to maintain its existence in our reality. Without victims, without transformations, it would be pulled back to whatever dimension it came from. "Everyone out!" I shouted, even though I was the only normal human left in the penthouse. But my voice carried beyond the physical, reached the 23 consciousness trapped in that amalgamated horror. "Fight it! Refuse the transformation! You don't have to accept this!" The amalgamated being shuddered, 23 voices crying out in unison. Some of them were fighting, trying to pull themselves free, their hope and anger and refusal to accept their fate creating antibodies in the transformed flesh. The creature shrieked, a sound that shattered every piece of glass in the penthouse as its perfect creation began to rebel against itself. "You cannot stop this!" the creature raged, lashing out with those impossible limbs. One of them passed through me, and I felt every cell in my body scream in protest as it tried to transform me from the inside out. But I held on to that defiance, that human stubbornness that refuses to accept defeat even in the face of the impossible. And I wasn't alone. Through the windows I could see lights, police cars, fire trucks, ambulances. The cavalry was coming. Martinez had tracked me somehow, followed my insane drive across the city. They couldn't fight the creature, but their presence, their determination to help, their hope that they could make a difference, it all added to the psychic antibodies attacking the creature's influence. The creature's form began to destabilize, reality reasserting itself in the penthouse. The impossible angles started to flatten out, the symbols began to fade, and the amalgamated being started to separate, individual bodies beginning to emerge from the unified mass. "This is not over," the creature said, its voice losing its multidimensional echo. "I am eternal. I will return. And when I do—" "We'll be ready," I said, and I meant it. "Humanity isn't as weak as you think. We survive. We adapt. We overcome. And now we know you exist. Now we know you can be fought." The creature gave one last shriek of rage and then imploded, folding in on itself until it occupied no space at all, leaving only a void that reality quickly rushed to fill. The 23 victims collapsed to the floor, separate again, human again, traumatized beyond belief, but alive. Some of them would recover, with therapy and time. Others would be institutionalized, their minds unable to cope with what they had experienced. But they were human, and they were alive, and that was more than I had dared hope for. The aftermath was a bureaucratic nightmare. 23 people claiming they had been turned into a single creature by an interdimensional entity didn't make for a believable police report. The official story became a mass drugging event. Someone had spiked the party drugs with an experimental hallucinogen that caused shared psychotic episodes.
The physical evidence of transformation was explained away as temporary paralysis and muscle spasms caused by the drug. But Martinez knew the truth. She'd seen enough, felt enough of the wrongness in that penthouse to know that something beyond normal explanation had happened. She didn't push me for details, but she made sure I got the help I needed. Real help, from people who understood that sometimes the impossible happens and you just have to find a way to live with it. I retired from the force 3 months later. Officially, it was due to PTSD from the November incident. Unofficially, it was because I could still feel the connection, faint but present, like scar tissue in my mind. The creature was gone, but not destroyed. Pulled back to whatever dimension it came from, but not killed. It would return eventually, maybe in a year, maybe in a century. And when it did, someone would need to know how to fight it. So I write this account, document everything that happened, create a record that can't be explained away or covered up. I send copies to people I trust, people in positions to do something when the creature returns. I've become something I never expected. Not a cop, but a guardian, a watcher, someone who stands between humanity and the things that exist in the spaces between spaces. The city looks different to me now. I see the thin places, the spots where reality isn't quite as solid as it should be. Times Square at 3 a.m., the abandoned subway tunnels beneath Central Park. Certain apartments in buildings that are just a little too old, where the angles don't quite add up right. The creature showed me how fragile our reality really is, how much danger lurks just outside our perception. But it also showed me how strong humanity can be. 23 people faced with a transformation that should have destroyed their minds, fought back. They refused to accept their fate, refused to give in to despair. And that refusal was enough to wound a creature that existed outside the normal laws of physics. We're not as helpless as the creature thought we were. My name is Ray Castellano. I was a detective with the NYPD for 23 years. I stopped an interdimensional entity from transforming New York City into its personal art project. And if you're reading this, if you're watching this video at 2 a.m. when the boundaries between worlds are thinnest, remember this. The monsters are real, but so is our ability to fight them. Keep your hope. Keep your defiance. Keep your humanity. Because something out there is always watching, always waiting, always hungry. And the only thing standing between it and us is our refusal to give in.